If you're curious about GLP-1 medications like Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro, or if you're already taking one and you have questions or concerns about if you're doing everything right, then this is the place for you. I'm Kara McIver, a registered dietitian who specializes in chronic disease prevention and management, including of insulin-related conditions and obesity. In this masterclass, I'm pulling together everything I know and you need to know about these GLP-1 weight loss medications. This will be a one-stop shop, clear, evidence-based guide. We'll cover what these medications actually do in the body, how to eat to support your results, what side effects to look out for, the truth about nutrient deficiencies in folks taking these weight loss medications, and some tips to maximize and maintain your results, even if you end up coming off of these medications at some point. Whether you're just starting out, in the middle of your journey, or planning for what comes next, this masterclass is going to be useful for you. I originally recorded these videos at different times and released them separately. I've combined them all here, which makes for a little bit easier watching experience for some folks if you want all of that information at once. All of this content is really designed to help you feel confident, informed, and in control. Let's dive in. And if you find this masterclass to be useful, I would so appreciate if you subscribed to my YouTube channel, where there's more evidence-based, easy to accomplish nutrition tips for all kinds of insulin-related conditions. So in this video, first I'm going to explain what semaglutide even is, and then we'll talk about how it works in the body. After that, I'll tell you a little bit about the different name brands of these weight loss medications. And at the end of this video, I'll tell you about Tirzepatide, which is a little bit different type of weight loss medication than semaglutide specifically. Semaglutide is the generic name for the medications used to treat type 2 diabetes and obesity. Now, the medication is a peptide or a protein that looks like a hormone that we make in the body naturally. The hormone that we make naturally is called glucagon-like peptide 1, which is why you have maybe heard of these weight loss medications being called GLP1 or GLP1RA medications. That refers to that natural hormone in the body. So if these medications are glucagon-like, let's talk about what glucagon is and how it works in the body before we really get into these medications specifically. So glucagon is a hormone that's made in the pancreas that is specifically part of the body's natural mechanism to maintain a healthy blood glucose level. So blood glucose is a little bit of a Goldilocks thing in our body. It can't go too high, but it also can't go too low. And glucagon specifically helps keep our blood sugar from going too low. Then there's insulin. Insulin is the hormone that essentially keeps our blood sugar from going too high, and they work in opposition to each other. Now, I will have a whole series on insulin coming later, so if you are interested, watch out for those videos as well. Glucagon-like peptide 1, GLP-1. The molecule that the semaglutide medications are mimicking. It does a whole bunch of different stuff in the body, but the thing that we're most concerned about is that it increases the amount of insulin that you produce, and it also decreases the amount of glucagon that you produce, which then decreases the floor of where your blood sugar levels can be. Now, taken together, both of those mechanisms work to lower blood sugar levels overall over time. And that makes sense because the primary function of the semaglutide medications was to lower and improve blood glucose levels. So that's a bit about the hormones that the medications are mimicking. So let's talk specifically about how these medications work to lower blood sugar levels. And then we'll also talk about some of the off-label functions of these medications, which is essentially the side effects that we have deemed as other benefits of these medications. In the United States, there are 3 name brand semaglutide medications, and they are Ozempic, Rybelsus, and Wegovy. For now, I'm going to talk about what they do as a class of medications, so what they all do. In part 3 of this video, I'll give you a little bit of the differences between these 3 medications that you might want to be aware of. Spoiler alert, the major difference is what the medication brand is approved for and which brand different insurance companies will cover. So remember, the primary function of these medications is to lower blood sugar. And it does this in 3 ways. The first way, I've already mentioned. It increases the amount of insulin that we produce. And insulin is specifically responsible for lowering blood sugar. Now, this is a crude analogy, but type 2 diabetes is essentially a disease where you don't have enough keys for the locks on the doors of your cells. Or maybe those doors are a little bit sticky, like you need to put a shoulder into the door to kind of open it up. That is essentially insulin insufficiency or insulin resistance. Now, semaglutide is like a power boost in a video game where now you have more keys. So you have more keys to open the doors on your cells. And this is good. We need the cells to open up to let the sugar from the blood inside so that we can make energy. We want the sugar in our cells. We don't want the sugar to be pooling in our bloodstream. So number 1, semaglutide gives us more keys or more insulin to open up our cells in order to make energy. So the second thing that semaglutide does is it reduces the amount of sugar that is being put into the bloodstream by the liver. The liver will put sugar into the bloodstream when our cells tell the liver they don't have enough energy. This is a normal and healthy protective mechanism of the body. We have these sensors within our cells that say, hey, I'm out of energy. To make energy, I need more sugar. So we store a little bit of sugar in our liver that we can then put into our blood, and our blood can carry it to our cells in order to make that energy. However, with type 2 diabetes, those sensors are telling the liver we need energy. However, there's already sugar in the blood. The problem isn't that there's no sugar in the blood to let into the cells. It's that the sugar is stuck in the blood. And when the liver puts more sugar into the bloodstream to try and fix the problem, it's really just adding more sugar to the mountain of sugar that's in our bloodstream. The third thing that semaglutide does is it slows down our digestion. Now, by slowing down our digestion, we are helping our blood sugar in 2 different ways. The first way is that when we are digesting more slowly, we feel full and satisfied from our meals for a lot longer. And when we feel full and satisfied for longer, we are less likely to snack between meals, and we're much more likely to go a longer amount of time between meals. So in that way, we're just knowingly consuming less calories, less sugar, less food overall. And that's important. We're going to talk more about that in a little bit. The second thing that happens when we slow down our digestion is that our body is better able to match the amount of insulin we have with the amount of sugar in our bloodstream. So the way I like to think about this is if you've ever seen that old clip from I Love Lucy, where she's working in the candy factory and the candies are coming past her on a conveyor belt. At the beginning, they're coming one at a time and they're coming slowly, and she can keep up and eat each one of those pieces of candy. But then the conveyor belt starts coming faster, there's more pieces of candy. Lucy can't catch all of the candies that are going past. So some of the candies are making it past her. This is sort of what happens with our blood sugar. When we slow down our digestion, that's like the conveyor belt moving a little bit more slowly so that our body can produce the right amount of insulin to deal with each of the candies, each of the molecules of glucose as they're trickling into our bloodstream. When we speed up our digestion, there's more sugar going into the blood at any given time, and it is harder for our insulin to match the sugar amounts, which means that some of that sugar, instead of being dealt with, instead of being pushed into the cells, it stays in the bloodstream. So in that example, in that video, Lucy is the insulin because she's handling the sugar. The chocolates on the conveyor belt are the blood glucose or the blood sugar molecules, and semaglutide is controlling how fast the conveyor belt is going. So those are the three major mechanisms of the semaglutide medication. 1, it increases our insulin production. 2, it reduces that unnecessary sugar dump from the liver. And 3, it slows down our digestion, so this increased amount of insulin can now appropriately balance with the amount of sugar going into our bloodstream at any given time. From these 3 mechanisms, you can probably already start to understand how, in addition to lowering our blood sugar levels, this medication may also help consume fewer calories and lead to weight loss. If we have more sugar from the blood being able to enter our cells are going to say, hey, I have enough energy from a smaller amount of food. We're going to eat less, eat fewer calories. If we are not dumping extra sugar into the bloodstream, then we won't be making more energy than we need, so we won't be storing energy. We store all extra energy in the body as fat, and we are slowing down our digestion so we feel fuller longer, and so we're naturally just eating less. In all of these ways, consume fewer calories, which leads to weight loss. And that weight loss is actually that off-label usage of some of these type 2 diabetes medications. An off-label usage is essentially a side effect. It is a side effect of the blood sugar reductions that patients are also seeing weight loss. So this was not originally intended to be a weight loss or a weight management medication. It was specifically designed to address blood sugar levels. And after they were doing clinical trials and seeing actual people take these medications, they were finding that those people were also experiencing weight loss. Now, weight loss is not the only side effect of these medications. These medications can cause things like nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, constipation. These seem reasonable considering that we are changing how the digestive tract is moving. But there are some more serious side effects too. Things like extended pain in the stomach, blurred vision, changes to our mood. There are also some types of cancer whose risk increases when taking these weight loss medications. These side effects are why I really, really, really recommend that if you are considering taking these medications, that you see a doctor, you see a prescriber, and you work with a dietitian while you're on these medications to manage the blood sugar changes, the weight changes, but also manage some of these potential side effects or symptoms. Now, we're going to talk about this a little bit later in this video, but there are certainly places to get these weight loss medications that are not like your primary care physician's office, an endocrinologist's office. I've even seen these medications being advertised, not just online, but also like in local estheticians' offices. Now, I love the woman who does my Botox, but if I am having blurred vision or extended pain in my stomach, that is not who I want to go to manage those types of symptoms. And so for that reason, I'm going to caution you against getting these weight loss medications from anywhere besides a primary care physician, an endocrinologist, someone who is really qualified to be prescribing them. Now that you know a little bit about how these medications work, let's talk about the different name brands that are available here in the United States. So here in the US, there are 3 semaglutide medications that have been approved by the FDA. These are Ozempic, Rybelsus, and Wegovy. Ozempic and Rybelsus are specifically approved by the FDA to treat type 2 diabetes, which means to be prescribed one of those two medications, you have to meet the criteria of a type 2 diabetes diagnosis. There are 3 different ways for your doctor to diagnose type 2 diabetes. The first would be an HbA1c test. The second would be a fasting glucose test. And the third would be an oral glucose tolerance test. I will describe what each of these types of tests is in a different video, but just understand for now, in order to be prescribed Ozempic or Rybelsus, you have to have undergone one of those 3 tests, and you actually have to take them twice and meet the diagnostic criteria for type 2 diabetes twice. Now, Ozempic is a shot that you give yourself once a week, whereas Rybelsus is an oral pill that you take on a daily basis. Remember I said that semaglutide is a peptide. Well, peptides can be inactivated by our stomach acid. And so that is why Rybelsus, which goes in, through the mouth down into the stomach, needs to be taken every single day, because part of the medication isn't even making it into the bloodstream when you take it in a pill form. Whereas if you do the injection, you only need to do it once a week because it's bypassing your stomach acid, and that whole dose of medication is going to make it straight into your bloodstream. Now, the third brand name of semaglutide in the US is Wegovy. Wegovy has been approved for weight loss and weight management in people with obesity. So for people who have a BMI over 30, or for people who have a BMI between 27 and 29, which is considered the high end of overweight, plus another co-condition that is related to obesity, something like high blood pressure, high cholesterol, pre-diabetes, right? Elevated blood sugar levels, but not quite all the way up to type 2 diabetes, sleep apnea, PCOS, things like this, you would potentially qualify for Wegovy. While Ozempic and Rybelsus are not approved for weight loss or weight management, if you are taking those for type 2 diabetes, you will likely also see weight loss. Similarly, if you are taking Wegovy for weight management, you will also almost certainly see reductions in blood sugar levels because they're the same drug. They're doing the same thing. It's just a matter of what the pharmaceutical company that produces the medication asked the FDA for approval to treat. Just because you only qualify for one medication over another does not necessarily mean that your insurance company is going to cover the medication that you qualify for. And these medications are quite expensive if they are not covered by insurance. We are talking about over $1,000 a month for these prescriptions. And that is where online and compounding pharmacies are coming into the equation. That is why you are seeing so many ads on TV, online, on podcasts for these online pharmacies. So compounding pharmacies, which is what these online pharmacies use, bypass the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. Compounding pharmacies historically have produced medications for patients who could not be served by the FDA approved medications. So for instance, if a patient had an allergy to one component of a medication, they could get the active ingredient formulated without their allergen through a compounding pharmacy. Compounding pharmacies are not, however, supposed to be making essentially dupes of FDA approved medications. But in the case of weight loss drugs, that is really what they're doing. They are making slight tweaks to these weight loss medications so they can sell them at a lower cost to patients without using insurance. However, those tweaks that have been made by the compounding pharmacy, again, the Food and Drug Administration has not studied if those formulations of the weight loss medications are safe or effective. Now, the best case scenario here is that it's just an ineffective or a less effective version of the medication. So yeah, you're paying less, but the medication might not even work. In the worst case scenario, you're going to end up taking a medication that could put you in worse health than before. And so there is an NPR article about the questions you should be asking about a compounding pharmacy or about an online pharmacy if you are considering getting your weight loss medication through that route. And I will link it down in the description. I will also link a blog post from GoodRx that lays out how to figure out if your insurance company covers the name brand weight loss medication that you qualify for. Both of those things will be down in the description for you. Now, if you're hearing this and you're starting to think twice about these online pharmacies and their weight loss medications, I will have some videos coming on non-medication ways to lower your blood sugar levels, to increase your satiety and fullness after meals, some ways that you can lower your blood sugar without food. So stay with me. These medications are not the only way to improve or lower your risk of developing type 2 diabetes. Now, in this last piece of the video, I want to talk a little bit about tirzepatide. Tirzepatide is another class of weight loss medications. So the three we've already talked about are semaglutides. There are also tirzepatide medications. Now, tirzepatide medications, they combine the action of GLP1 or semaglutide medications, and then they also utilize GIP mechanisms. GIP stands for gastric inhibitory polypeptides. And what GIP medications do is they further slow down digestion by reducing the amount of stomach acid that we produce. So when we have less stomach acid, our food can't move from the stomach to the small intestine as quickly. So by adding that GIP component of these medications, we are further slowing down our digestion, which then again helps us feel fuller for longer, which probably reduces our appetite even further, and again allows us to better match our insulin production with the amount of sugar going into the bloodstream at any one time. So research has shown that these tirzepatide medications are actually causing more weight loss and reducing blood sugar levels even more than these semaglutide medications. And so these medications are being prescribed to patients who medically would benefit from even higher amounts of weight loss or have even higher blood sugar levels or blood sugar levels that haven't responded very much to the semaglutide medications. Again, in the US, there are two name brands of these tirzepatide medications. There is Mounjaro and Zepbound. You maybe have seen ads for these two medications as well. Mounjaro has been approved for type 2 diabetes, and Zepbound has been approved for obesity as well as obstructive sleep apnea, which is an obesity-related condition. And there are differences in insurance coverage of these two medications as well. Both of those drugs are injections, so no oral pill tablet version of either of those tirzepatide medications. So now you have a little bit better idea how these weight loss medications really work. They increase our insulin production, they decrease the unnecessary dumping of sugar into the bloodstream by the liver, and they slow our digestion, which allows us to knowingly and unknowingly regulate our appetite a little bit better and maybe change our behavior around food so that we can lose some weight and lower our blood sugar levels. Now, good health really relies on both the quantity of calories you're taking in and the quality of those calories. The definition of diet quality is diversified, balanced, and healthy intake, which provides energy and essential nutrients for growth and a healthy, active life. Now, calories will dictate your physical weight, but if those calories are made up of poor quality foods, you may still be putting yourself at risk for chronic diseases simply by being deficient in certain nutrients. We can assume that these weight loss medications are going to take care of the quantity side of the good health equation, right? We can see that it is causing people to eat fewer calories and therefore lose weight. But what we need to be aware of is that while people are eating fewer calories, the calories that they are getting in are still providing enough of the nutrients that are actually going to keep them healthy, feeling good, recovering well from activity and exercise, sleeping well, keeping our mental health good. Now, the number one risk factor for not getting enough nutrients in the general public is simply not eating enough calories overall. When you eat more calories, you tend to get enough of most of our micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, things like that, just simply because if they're abundant in food and you eat a bunch of different foods, you're probably getting enough of those nutrients. But when we are limiting or cutting down on the number of calories that are going in, we are just definitely cutting back on the amount of nutrients. And any type of medication, whether it's a weight loss medication or maybe a medication for ADHD, something that limits our appetite is going to put us at risk for some of these nutrient deficiencies. In addition to just generally eating fewer calories, having less of an appetite, we know that these weight loss medications also cause some level of nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, constipation in many of the medication users. And so, if you are just not feeling very good, if you are experiencing constipation or diarrhea, you're just going to be less motivated to eat anyway. And there are going to be certain foods that are going to help you deal with or manage your nausea, your diarrhea, your constipation. So you're probably going to skew towards those foods, maybe more than you would if you weren't on these medications. Users are also reporting that high fat and high sugar foods are increasing the amount of nausea that they experience, while higher protein foods tend to decrease the amount of nausea that they experience. So that gives us some clues into the types of foods that they may limit and therefore the types of nutrients that they may be missing out on. Researchers have also coined this term Ozempic tongue, which refers to reports that are coming out from these medication users that they are experiencing the 4 taste sensations at higher levels. So salty, sweet, bitter, and sour. They are just tasting those things on their tongue more, and therefore they're craving to eat more and more of those things to satisfy that desire for, say, a sweet or salty treat. They just need less food to actually satisfy that craving. So we're getting rid of some of those cravings, which also is altering what people are eating and therefore what nutrients they're getting into the body. Now, before we dive into deficiencies specific to weight loss medication users, I want to talk a little bit about common deficiencies in Americans overall, and especially obese Americans overall, because we know that these groups tend to have specific deficiencies before they even start these medications. We know that they are already at risk simply by being overweight for certain deficiencies. And then we may be making those deficiencies even worse when they start taking these medications. According to national survey data, young to middle-aged adults only score a 56 or 59, respectively, out of 100 on the healthy eating index. Overweight and obese individuals score even lower. Now, class 1 obesity folks, so a BMI over 30 but not quite to 35, they have a healthy eating index score as a group of 50.8. And our class 2 obesity folks, so a BMI over 35, their healthy eating index score is a 48.9. So already we have a lot of opportunity for improving the diet quality of these folks before they even change their diet on these weight loss meds. The typical American diet is already low in multiple food groups: vitamins, minerals, fiber, etc. Because these medications are still newly available to the public, we don't have specific recommendations for exact intake levels of our macronutrients or our vitamins and minerals for people on weight loss meds. But we do have the general guidelines for Americans, people who are generally engaging in weight loss, and we have recommendations for patients who have undergone bariatric surgery. And that's important because bariatric surgery patients are the only population that we know is losing similar amounts of weight than weight loss medication patients. So if we are talking about nutrients that are necessary in this, 17 to 20% or higher body weight reduction realm, we can use the existing science for those bariatric patients to give us at least an educated starting point for our weight loss medication patients. At this point, it is June 2025. We only have one published study about the typical intake of semaglutide medication users. There are lots of other groups who are studying the intake of the weight loss medication users, but they just haven't been published yet. We will probably know more about typical intake of these folks by the end of this year, 2025. But for now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what they found in this first study. These were 70 adults who had been taking semaglutide medications for at least a month. They filled out some surveys, and then they also did a 3-day food journal that they turned in. The researchers analyzed all of that information to get a good look at the nutrients that these folks were eating and where they compared to recommendations. So the short story here is, if you are on a weight loss medication or considering taking one, there is more to think about than just weight loss, which is why it really makes sense to be working very closely with your primary care physician, or especially a registered dietitian, to make sure that we are managing the diet quantity and the diet quality that is going to keep you in your best health. Now, I'm going to try to lay these things out side by side: our general recommendations, our bariatric recommendations, and the intake seen in these patients in the study, so you get an idea of where we're maybe meeting what we think is best practice and where we may not be meeting what we think is best practice. I'm going to start with protein, because in all weight loss patients, we tend to prioritize protein intake so these folks are maintaining as much muscle mass as possible while losing weight. I also want to talk about protein first because protein seems to alleviate nausea for our weight loss medication users, and so they tend to prioritize protein when choosing foods. For the general population, we recommend 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of your body weight per day, just to avoid deficiency. Some folks with certain goals or certain health needs, they need to eat more than that, but that's our general recommendation. We also tend to make recommendations about percentage of the calories going in a day that come from any one macronutrient. For protein, it is recommended that between 10 and 35% of a person's overall calories in a day come from our protein foods. Our general weight loss recommendations, sometimes protein is prioritized even higher for those patients, again, to help maintain muscle mass during weight loss, but also because some folks find that protein foods are more satiating So help folks manage their hunger while they are in a calorie deficit. So the recommendations for weight loss go all the way up to 2.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, or 1 gram per pound. So anywhere in that range, 0.8 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight, tend to be our general protein recommendations. For bariatric patients, we specifically say between 60 and 80 grams of protein per day. What this study found is that our semaglutide users are taking in an average of 77 grams of protein, which does fall in that recommendation that we make for bariatric patients. They also found that protein tends to be 18.5% of the daily calorie intake for these semaglutide users. Now, that is in line with our recommendations for the general population as a percentage. But depending on a person's body weight, that 77 grams may not actually be enough to meet those upper level protein recommendations that we see in other weight loss patients. For carbohydrates, the bare minimum recommendation for most folks, general population or weight loss population, is 130 grams of carbohydrates per day. And that is because carbohydrates are the primary fuel for the body, for the brain, and there are certain parts of our body, like our red blood cells, that really only use carbohydrates for energy. I think the general population recommendation for carbohydrates is 275 grams per day, but there's some level of personalization, again, depending on a person's preferences and goals. But between 130 and 275 grams per day is about our general recommendation for carbohydrates. For the general public, we recommend between 45 and 65% of our daily calories come from carbohydrates. We recommend 35 to 48% of calories in a day come from carbohydrates if folks have undergone that bariatric surgery. The GLP1 medication survey found that folks are eating about 41.5% of their daily calories from carbohydrates, which on average came out to about 184 grams of carbohydrates per day. Now, that total number, that 184, is above our bare minimum carbohydrate recommendation, which is good. But percentage of calories wise, it's a little bit low for the general recommendations. It's in line with our bariatric surgery recommendations. So it might be the right amount for these folks. It may not be enough to be getting the right amount of fiber though. Now for the general public, we recommend 14 grams of fiber per 1,000 calories that someone is eating in a day. So the recommendation for most adults is to be eating between 2,000, 2,500. If you're super active or a bigger person, it might be up around the 3,000 calorie range, which is going to put most people in the range of 28 to 35, maybe up to 40 grams of fiber per day. Most Americans are not getting anywhere near that amount. In bariatric surgery patients, we recommend 15 grams of fiber per about 800 to 1,000 calories. Our semaglutide users, our GLP1 medication users, what they found is they are averaging an intake of about 14 grams per day. My guess is that calorie intake for these patients is probably somewhere around the 1,000 to 1,500 calorie range for a lot of these folks. So if they're eating 14 grams per day and they're only eating 1,000 calories per day, that ratio is still correct, but is 14 grams a day enough to reduce our risk of things like cardiovascular disease, diverticulosis, colon cancer? I don't think we know that yet. Just like carbohydrates, we all need a certain amount of fat every day in our diet to stay healthy. If we're not eating enough fat, it can impact our hormone production. It can also limit our ability to absorb vitamin D, which all Americans tend to be deficient in vitamin D. And not eating enough fat can also increase our risk for gallstones, kind of like kidney stones, but in our gallbladder. The recommendation for folks on weight loss medications are similar to the recommendations for the general public. We want most of our fats to be coming from plants. These are called unsaturated fats, and fish. whereas saturated fats come from things like red meat and processed foods, and we want to limit those. Now, interestingly, this survey of weight loss medication users found that percentage-wise, remember those recommendations that we make of percent of calories that should come from one of our macronutrients, percentage-wise, these weight loss medication patients are actually exceeding our recommendations for fat intake. For the general population, what we recommend is about 20 to 35% of our calories come from fat. This study found that weight loss medication users, almost 40% of their calories were coming from fat. The general recommendations gram or total amount wise is about 78 grams. Again, there's a range depending on a person's preferences, size, health goals, etc. But about 78 grams of fat is what is recommended on a daily basis. This survey found that on average, our weight loss medication users were getting 78 grams of fat. So again, the actual amount that they're taking in might be an appropriate level for them. However, the recommendations for our bariatric patients is 45 to 60 grams of fat. So the percentage is a little bit high in our semaglutide users as compared to our recommendations in the general population. The total number is a little bit high as compared to the recommendations that we make for our bariatric patients. So this level of fat might be appropriate, but might not be appropriate for folks on weight loss medications. But again, if carbohydrates are making us nauseous and proteins make us feel better, if we're getting our proteins from meat, we're also typically getting fat. And so I think there's a couple of things at play here in why weight loss medication patients are getting this level of fat intake. Those are the macronutrients. When it comes to our micronutrients, things like vitamins and minerals, our weight loss medication patients are also falling short on some of those important nutrients as well. As I mentioned, the general American population and the obese American population are typically deficient in many of these same micronutrients. So these folks are starting from behind on these micronutrients when they start taking these medications. They found that 99% of semaglutide medication users were not getting enough vitamin D or vitamin K. They found that 94% of these medication users were not getting enough choline, 90% were not getting enough magnesium, and 88% were not getting enough iron in their diet. Remember in the intro, I said there are some chronic diseases that result from nutrition deficiencies, not just excess nutrition. So inadequate fiber intake, especially with high saturated fat intake, will increase someone's risk for heart disease, especially high blood lipids. Inadequate calcium intake, which they also found in this study, and inadequate vitamin D can be detrimental to our heart, our nerves, and especially for our bones. Now, older females are especially already at high risk of developing osteoporosis. And so if we're spending this extended period of time on weight loss medications, not getting enough calcium or vitamin D, the risk of having brittle bones goes up even more. Inadequate iron, B12, or folate puts us at risk for anemia. Anemia means that we're not producing enough red blood cells, and red blood cells are the delivery truck for oxygen to all the different tissues and different pieces of our body. If we're not getting enough oxygen, we are at risk for decreasing cardiovascular stamina, athletic performance, heart problems overall, even stroke or death. Inadequate vitamin C can reduce our ability to make collagen, which impacts our skin, our hair, our nail, our muscle health. It also prevents us from being able to properly absorb iron from plant sources, and it puts us at risk for scurvy. Another vitamin that they saw folks were not eating enough of when they were on these weight loss medications is vitamin A. Vitamin A helps us with our vision. It also helps us with our skin. If any of you out there are on retinol or tretinoin, those compounds are downstream of vitamin A. And lack of vitamin K, which We saw in this study almost 100% of these folks were not getting enough vitamin K. That can cause bruising, bleeding. Magnesium is one of our electrolytes, so it impacts fluid balance and hydration status, which is really important while we're taking these weight loss medications. Not enough magnesium is also being pointed to some of our issues with sleep, and inadequate choline can impact our liver and our muscle health. So the weight loss and the blood sugar reductions that these medications create in these patients, they're huge, and they go a long way in preventing some of these chronic diseases of excess intake. But if we're not careful, we might see rates of these chronic diseases related to nutrient deficiencies start to increase again. With fewer calories coming in, there is just less wiggle room to be missing on some of these nutrient-dense foods. I'm going to specifically talk about what are the foods that you can eat to address those nutrient deficiencies. So if you haven't watched those videos already, I highly recommend it. It is going to give you the background information that you would get if you were a weight loss medication user, actually seeing me as one of my in-person clients. If you have watched all of those videos already, thank you so much. I hope you have a better understanding, but now is the time to take action. So the first food that I am going to recommend is meat. Now, this is not one of those crazy channels that is going to recommend something like a carnivore diet or a keto diet. That is absolutely not what I mean. But lean meats are going to be an important and very useful food to be eating pretty regularly throughout your day if you are taking one of these weight loss medications. So what I mean when I say lean meats are things like leaner cuts of chicken, leaner cuts of beef, leaner cuts of pork. I don't necessarily mean like breakfast sausage or bacon or a ribeye. I mean something like skirt steak and chicken breasts. Protein is important for two reasons when you are taking these weight loss medications. The first is that protein seems to be the macronutrient that causes the least amount of nausea for folks who are taking these weight loss medications. So likely that is because when we eat protein, it doesn't stimulate insulin release like eating carbohydrates does. And when you are taking these weight loss medications and you have a really high insulin release, that tends to be when folks get really nauseous. And anytime you're feeling really nauseous, you are just less likely to eat more food. And so we want to reduce nausea as much as possible. If you don't feel well, you're not going to eat much of anything. Nausea also tends to be one of the leading factors for people coming off of these semaglutide or weight loss medications. The second reason that protein is important is that anyone undergoing weight loss is going to be better off if they maintain as much muscle mass as they can, and what they are losing is mostly fat mass. Having skeletal muscle mass is a really important part of healthy aging. It allows us to continue being able to go to the bathroom independently, put our groceries away, just live independently as we get older. So if you are on a weight loss medication, we don't want you to be losing muscle mass. And what we know from other weight loss programs and bariatric surgery patients is that if you are eating more protein, more of what you lose will be fat and less of what you lose will be muscle. Skeletal muscle mass also has the ability to pull sugar from the bloodstream without the use of insulin. So if you are on one of these medications because you have type 2 diabetes specifically, it is incredibly important and useful to maintain that skeletal muscle mass. You definitely don't want to lose that when you lose weight. Now, lean proteins like chicken, maybe pork tenderloin, lean cuts of beef or steak, they are going to give you all the amino acids that you need to maintain that muscle mass, but without the higher amounts of fat that tend to cause nausea when you are taking these weight loss medications. Now, in my last video, I went over in some detail what our emerging research is telling us most semaglutide or weight loss medication users are eating on a daily basis and what they are missing out on. Now, they tend to be eating enough protein to avoid deficiency, but they don't seem to be eating enough, or what we would recommend for anyone losing weight in any method, to maintain muscle mass. So if you are taking one of these medications, or if you're considering it, you may need to reach for protein even more than you already are. Meat is also going to be a good source of two other nutrients that our survey found semaglutide users tend to be deficient in. Meat is also going to be a really good source of two other nutrients that our survey found most semaglutide users are not eating enough of. And those would be vitamin B12 and iron. Now, meat provides the most bioavailable form of iron. And what that simply means is that our bodies naturally absorb iron from meat better than we absorb iron from plants. Meat is also our best source of vitamin B12. Now, if you're taking a semaglutide medication like Ozempic or Wegovy, you're probably getting enough B12 if you're eating meat generally. Now, if you're taking a tirzepatide medication like Mounjaro or Zepbound, what those medications do in addition to the semaglutide medications is they actually reduce the amount of stomach acid that you're producing. And stomach acid is necessary to convert vitamin B12 from the inactive form to the active form. So if you don't have as much stomach acid because you're taking tirzepatide, even eating meat may not be enough to ensure that you're getting enough active form of the vitamin B12. So if you are taking a tirzepatide medication, you definitely want to talk to your doctor about a B12 supplement potentially, or monitoring your B12 levels with blood testing. Now, both vitamin B12 and iron are necessary to prevent anemia. Different types of anemia, but anemia nonetheless. If you develop anemia, you are going to feel sluggish, you are going to feel tired, you are just not going to be delivering oxygen to the tissues throughout your body, which can cause all kinds of problems. Now, lastly, meat is also a good source of choline. And choline is another nutrient that we found these weight loss medication users are typically not getting enough of in their diet. Choline plays a major role in metabolism, but also memory, muscle control, and brain function. A higher intake of choline has actually been associated with a lower risk of anxiety and depression. Now, one egg, as long as you are eating the yolk, the yellow part, or about 3 ounces of beef, will give you about a quarter of your necessary choline for a day. The second food I'm going to recommend is actually two foods, and you maybe don't need each one every single day, but maybe you alternate. And that is Greek yogurt and cottage cheese. Both of these foods are great ways to contribute to your protein goal overall for the day. So you don't need to just be hitting those protein goals with meat. Now, I specifically call out these two foods because of another two nutrients that weight loss medication users were found to not be getting enough of, and that is calcium and vitamin D. Now, that survey that looked at the typical intakes of semaglutide users found that most are not getting enough vitamin C, and 99% of semaglutide medication users are not eating enough vitamin D. Most Americans, in fact, are not eating enough vitamin D. Greek yogurt and cottage cheese are different preparations of dairy, and so they actually contain slightly different amounts of our different nutrients. So they both contain calcium, but one is higher than the other, and only one of them actually contains vitamin D, which is why I'm recommending both of these foods, and you can kind of mix and match or go back and forth. Now, calcium and vitamin D are really important because they play a huge role in the strength of our bones. Postmenopausal females already have a really high rate of brittle bones or osteoporosis. And if we are spending an extended period of time when we are pre-menopause in a calorie deficit or not getting enough calcium and vitamin D, we are increasing our risk even more of developing brittle bones, osteoporosis, which puts us at risk for breaks and falls when we get older. Now, an 8-ounce serving of Greek yogurt will provide about 415 milligrams of calcium. So almost half of what we need in a day, we can get from 1 cup of Greek yogurt. And here is where we start to see a difference. We get some calcium, but only about 150 milligrams of calcium in 1 cup of cottage cheese. So there's still some there, and it's going to be a useful contributor to our daily calcium intake, but it's not going to contribute as much as something like Greek yogurt. Calcium and vitamin D also play a role in muscular contraction, and that is important when it comes to our heart. A diet low in calcium and vitamin C increases your risk of developing an irregular heartbeat. Now, the recommendation is that adults consume about 15 micrograms per day of vitamin D. Now, light-skinned people who produce less melanin can produce vitamin D from sunlight exposure. However, most Americans are not getting enough vitamin D because we have inside jobs, maybe the weather where you are at, it's too hot or too cold, too rainy, too snowy, whatever, to get out into the sunlight. Or maybe you live in a state, especially a northern state, where the angle that the sun hits you certain times of the year just makes it so that it's impossible to make enough vitamin D with sun exposure. The other thing, this is a channel about reducing your risk of developing chronic diseases, including things like skin cancer. And so I do not typically recommend that you rely on the sun for your vitamin D when you can get it from food, because extended unprotected sun exposure can increase your risk of developing skin cancer. Wear your sunscreen, eat cottage cheese. Now, 1 cup of whole milk or 4% cottage cheese is going to give you about half of the vitamin D that you need in a day. Vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin. So what that means is, in order to absorb it in the body, we need to have fat along with it. So if you eat something like a low fat or a no fat cottage cheese, you are actually not going to get vitamin D from those sources. You do need to get that whole fat cottage cheese in order to get the vitamin D. Now, you can get vitamin D from fortified cow's milk, even at those lower percentages of fat, or from plant-based fortified milks, because that fortification puts the vitamin D back in. However, there isn't going to be vitamin D in Greek yogurt, even the full fat type of Greek yogurt. We just don't get vitamin D from it. Yogurt will, however, provide vitamin A. And vitamin A is another nutrient that weight loss medication users and many Americans are not getting enough of. And vitamin A is really good for our skin and our vision. So that, yogurt is a very useful food, even though it is not going to provide vitamin D. Now, the third food that I'm going to recommend is lentils. Now, you could choose any legume or fiber-rich whole grain, something like peas, beans, chickpeas, soybeans, even peanuts, but lentils are my favorite. Now, fiber is incredibly important in reducing our risk of developing chronic diseases like cardiovascular disease, colon cancer, and it feeds our microbiome. I'm not going to go into gut health and the microbiome in this video, but this is actually what my next series is going to be on. So if that interests you, subscribe, and those videos will be coming out in the next few days and weeks as well. Fiber is also super useful in stabilizing your blood glucose levels. So again, if you are on one of these weight loss medications because you have type 2 diabetes, these are the carbohydrates that you want to be eating. They're not going to spike your blood sugar. That fiber is going to keep your blood sugar lower. Besides fiber, lentils are also going to provide some other nutrients that our weight loss medication survey takers were found to be not eating enough of. Specifically, things like potassium, magnesium, and they're going to be a good source of that plant-based iron. Now, magnesium and potassium are 2 of our electrolytes, so they help us maintain good hydration, but they also help us keep a healthy heart, healthy muscles, and healthy brain cells. I'm not going to lie to you. Lentils, beans, other high fiber grains, they are going to make you fart. They just are.
Beans, the musical fruit. The more you eat, the more you toot.
This is part of that microbiome conversation that we're going to have in the next series, but trust me on this, it's not necessarily a bad thing. One way that you can manage the gas, manage the bloating, is when you are eating these foods, be sure to take something like a Beano. Even if you're not eating beans, Beano is just carbohydrate exogenous enzyme. All that means is it's going to help break down the fiber-rich carbohydrates that you have eaten. So again, that could be lentils, that could be chickpeas, that could be soybeans, that could be true, red beans, kidney beans, navy beans, white beans. Highly recommend Beano. Now, this video is not sponsored by Beano, but if Beano ever did want to sponsor a video, I am a power user and I highly recommend it. Now, this would not be a dietitian video if I was not giving you a recommendation to eat some more non-starchy vegetables. I'm specifically talking leafy greens overall really, and oranges. And by oranges, I don't necessarily mean the fruit. In this section, what I really mean is our orange colored vegetables. These are going to be good sources of vitamin K, vitamin E, potassium, and magnesium. Now, adult males need about 120 milligrams, and adult females need about 90 milligrams of vitamin K per day. It's one of the nutrients that males actually need more of than females. And the best source of vitamin K is leafy greens. This is things like collards, or turnip greens, spinach, yes, even kale. Now, I hate kale. I would choose collards over kale every day of the week and twice on Sundays, but if you like kale, go crazy, mama. Broccoli, soybeans, and canola oil are also good sources of vitamin K. Now, if you have seen a man shirtless in a grocery store yelling at you not to eat seed oils,
all of your chips, all of these chips, seed oils,
ignore that man. There is no research that indicates that seed oils are more inflammatory or dangerous for the heart. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Seed oils have been found to be nothing but heart healthy. Now, I'm going to pause here quickly just to mention that all of the foods that I have recommended so far and the ones that I will recommend after this, they specifically provide multiple nutrients that our weight loss medication users have been found to be deficient in. And that is on purpose. I cannot recommend for weight loss medication users like 75 different foods or 10 different meals to eat in a day. When you are on these weight loss medications, you just don't have much of an appetite. You are just really not eating that much food. So the foods that you do eat, they need to be providing lots of different nutrients and good quantities of those nutrients so that in eating smaller portion sizes and smaller quantities, you can still get all of the nutrients that are going to keep you healthy. I have another video on this that I will link here, and I talk about this with all of my clients. We want to be eating on purpose. We want to be eating in pursuit of your health goals. That does not necessarily mean eating as little as possible. We want to be intentional. We want to be choosing these nutrient powerhouses that are going to give us the vitamins and minerals that we need in smaller portion sizes. Avoiding deficiencies by eating the right foods on purpose is also going to be more cost effective than trying to avoid all of these deficiencies by supplementing. Yes, we could supplement with iron. We could supplement with vitamin 12. We could take potassium and magnesium supplements. However, that's going to be way more expensive than food. And you are going to eat some food, even while you are taking these weight loss medications. The food that you eat might as well be doing the work as opposed to having to buy supplements that are unregulated and typically just quite expensive. Okay, a couple more foods to prioritize, a short list of things that you can avoid, and then at the end, I'll give you some meals to actually put it all together in a way that makes sense for a real person on a real day. All right, number 5 is healthy fats. I want to define healthy fats versus unhealthy fats, or more healthy versus less healthy fats. When I say healthy fats, I'm really talking about unsaturated fats, which we typically get from plants and from fish, as opposed to saturated fats, which we tend to get from red meats and sometimes like processed foods, processed baked goods, fried foods. People who eat more unsaturated or plant-based fats tend to have lower rates of cardiovascular disease, lower amounts of inflammation. than people who eat higher amounts of saturated fats or red meat fats. Now, that doesn't mean you can never have saturated fats. Go back to number one, I recommend meat, even red meat occasionally. Again, we want it to be lean, we want it to be lower in fat, but there's going to be some fat if you're eating red meat, and that is okay. We just want to be eating mostly, prioritizing mostly unsaturated fats. So this would be things like avocado, hummus, again, some of these seed oils, nuts, seeds, fatty fishes, and very dark chocolate. These healthy fats play an important role in one, giving us energy. These healthy fats tend to not cause as much nausea as the more like saturated fats or the deep fried fats in people on weight loss medications. And depending on which healthy fat source you're choosing, they may also provide things like a little bit of protein, some fiber, some iron, and various other vitamins and minerals. Just kind of depends on which of these healthy fats you're choosing. There are a couple of recipes that I have included in an ebook that I wrote specific to weight loss medications. I will link that down in the description. Food number 6 on this list is blueberries. Now, I really mean any low sugar fruits, but my favorite is blueberries. Blueberries have been found to be really good for heart health, really good for brain health. They're also really, just like candy. For most people, I recommend getting a lot of fruit, any fruit that they enjoy. Getting sugar from fruit comes with lots of water, some fiber, lots of vitamins and minerals. And that is different from when we are getting sugar from pop, cookies, candy, even honey. Yes, they all break down into the same molecules and get used the same way in the body. So I don't want you to think of one as good or bad, but generally we get other stuff from fruit. We don't get other stuff from treats. Now, for people on weight loss medications, I recommend the low sugar fruits specifically. Again, things like berries, melon, apples, kiwi, grapefruit, just because if you eat a higher sugar fruit, especially if you eat it on its own without a protein or a fat, it can cause your blood sugar to go up, and with these weight loss medications could cause you to feel nauseous. So these fruits are going to provide vitamin C, which is going to help you absorb iron. It's going to help you build collagen. Vitamin C is going to help keep your immune system functioning. They're also going to give you potassium, magnesium, a little bit of water, a little bit of fiber. So they are going to be contributing a lot of actual nutrition, not just sugar. My last recommendation here is liquids. And that is because these weight loss medications can cause dehydration or at least dehydration-like symptoms. Liquids may also just be more tolerable or appealing if you are feeling nauseous, if you are not feeling like you have a huge appetite. You may be able to get in a little bit more nutrition through liquids rather than thinking about like having a solid meal. So I don't recommend just drinking water. And I especially don't recommend things like diet soda. It's not that you're not allowed to have something like a Diet Coke, but if you fill your small appetite with a beverage that doesn't contribute any vitamins or minerals to your day, that is a missed opportunity for nutrients. So something like soups or bone broth may contribute, some sodium, some potassium, some veggies, depending on what is in there. Maybe coconut milk, which might give you some potassium or magnesium, maybe a little bit of those healthy fats. Kefir or a drinkable yogurt, maybe something like a Yakult or a bottled Chobani drink, a smoothie, fruit juice, 100% fruit popsicles. Those are all going to be better choices in a lot of cases than water or a diet pop or an energy drink, because they're going to give you the hydration and the other nutrients that you need in a day. On the other side of the same coin, when you do sit down for a meal, eat your food first. Keep those beverages to the end of the meal if you have space, or between meals to give you nutrition when you can't do solid foods. But at mealtime, don't fill up on liquids first. Most people who fill up on liquids first tend to then not get enough nutrients later because they don't eat as much food. So those are 7 foods that I do recommend when you are taking these weight loss medications: meat, Greek yogurt or cottage cheese, lentils, non-starchy vegetables like leafy greens, healthy fats, low sugar fruits, and liquids with benefits. Very quickly, I want to leave you with 4 foods that I don't recommend you consume while you are on weight loss medications. Now, there are no foods that you can't have, but these are foods that are not going to be major contributors or not going to be super useful for you. And so I would deprioritize them. The first one we've already talked about is beverages with no nutrients. Water is good. If you are on a limited diet, you are not going to get everything you need from water. The second would be any food or beverage that is high in sugar or high in refined grains. That is simply because they are going to make you feel nauseous. And if you feel nauseous, you are less likely to eat more food later in the day. And again, more likely to not get the nutrients that you need. The last thing is alcohol. I would avoid alcohol when you're on these weight loss medications because you are not going to be eating very much food, and therefore you are going to feel the effects of alcohol really quickly. And overall, alcohol intake is associated with higher rates of chronic diseases. And so I'm just never recommending that any of my clients be drinking alcohol when they can avoid it. So last piece here, putting it all together into actual meals. I wrote an ebook that you can download from the link in the description that goes over how these medications actually work, and then also gives you a bunch of different recipes that you can mix and match to get the nutrients that you need. I don't call it a meal plan because I don't specify eat this, this, and this on this day, but you can mix and match all these things together to be getting a good dose of these nutrients that most folks are missing out on. Go get that, it's free. So I might recommend something like a Greek yogurt bowl or a smoothie at breakfast where you're combining some dairy and these low sugar fruits. And then I might top it with some nuts, seeds, healthy fats, a seed mix type of granola or chia seeds or something. At lunch, I might recommend something like a chicken Caesar salad if you are adding some spinach in there, not just romaine. For a snack, maybe you're doing couple of hard-boiled eggs and some nuts. Maybe you're doing some cheese and some fruit. For dinner, maybe you're doing something like a veggie-filled soup and a piece of chicken or a piece of fish on the side. Maybe it's a lentil soup. Sometimes when I make lentil soup, I like to add, instead of bacon, I'll put in chicken or turkey meatballs to add a little bit more protein in there. Maybe for a snack, you do something like a trail mix with dark chocolate in it, or chocolate covered raspberries. Like I said, that ebook is going to have a lot more examples, choices, even some recipes in there. But the important thing that I want you to be focusing on if you are taking one of these weight loss medications is eating on purpose, eating intentionally, so that even though you are eating small meals or you are not eating nearly as many calories as you have in the past, the food that you are eating is getting you the nutrients that you need to stay healthy. Every major medical society has deemed obesity a chronic disease, not just abnormal eating behavior. They also agree because obesity is a disease all on its own, it should be treated all on its own. This is especially important because obesity can increase the risk of developing other chronic diseases. So I'm not going to argue in this video with the American Medical Association or the NIH. Instead, what I'm going to talk about is how these weight loss medications like semaglutide and tirzepatide actually work in the body to reduce our risk of chronic diseases, not just changing our body weight. This is actually my second video in a series about weight loss medications. So if you haven't watched that first video, I recommend going back. That one will explain how these medications work generally, whereas in this video, I'm going to talk about how they work to reduce some of these chronic diseases specifically. These medications are also being studied in relationship to a bunch of different chronic diseases. So yes, type 2 diabetes, which is what they were originally developed to address, but also how do these medications reduce the risk of heart disease, polycystic ovary syndrome, sleep apnea, certain types of cancers. Emerging research is telling us that there is likely some benefit to be seen on all of these different obesity-related conditions. First, let's define what overweight and obesity really mean as a medical condition. These conditions refer to excessive or abnormal fat accumulation that poses a risk to someone's health. Historically, determining if a person had overweight or obesity came down to calculating their body mass index. Their body mass index, or BMI, is simply a ratio between their height and their weight. A BMI that calculated out to 25 to 29.9 would be categorized as overweight. A BMI of 30 to 34.9 would be classified as obesity class 1. 35 to 39.9 is obesity class 2. And anything above 40 is considered obesity class 3. Sometimes I hear people referring to their BMI and their body fat percentage interchangeably, but that is not quite accurate. BMI does not specifically address body fat percentage. It's just height and weight. Body fat percentage gives us an idea of someone's body weight, what percentage is fat, and what percentage of that weight comes from lean tissue. That's muscle, bone, water, things on our body that are not specifically adipose tissue. And this is important because what we have found is there are some folks in the overweight, maybe even in the obese BMI categories, that their weight is actually made up of a higher amount of muscle. And those folks are actually more metabolically healthy traditionally than folks who have a similar BMI, but more of their body weight is adipose tissue or fat tissue instead of muscle. In fact, at the end of 2024, the American Medical Association proposed a new criteria for defining obesity, which would include, yes, calculating BMI because it is easy, accessible, and inexpensive to do. But then also for folks who have an elevated BMI calculation, digging a little bit deeper into a body fat percentage or where the adipose tissue is stored on the body, because even that can impact someone's relative risk of developing a chronic disease. For instance, if someone has more adipose tissue in their midsection, that is more dangerous when it comes to developing things like type 2 diabetes, heart disease, cancer, etc. Whereas if a person stores more of their body weight in their butt, their thighs, their extremities, that is actually a little bit more protective from some of our chronic diseases. So currently, the prevalence of obesity in the US is about 43% in adults. That is folks who have a BMI of 30 or higher, about 43%. Now, by 2050, it is estimated that obesity prevalence among adults in the United States will be up at about 60%, if nothing changes. Now, obesity class 3 specifically, that highest classification of obesity, we are seeing a range of about 4.7 to 9.4% of American adults in that highest level classification. So about 1 in 10 to 1 in 20 American adults actually falls into that obesity class 3 or a BMI over 40. In 2023, about 1 in 7 or 14% of females aged 40 to 59 were considered obese specifically. So we have some idea of how many American adults are at a height and weight that would indicate that they maybe have this extra adiposity or extra weight on their body. Now, are all of these people with a BMI over 30 at risk of developing chronic diseases? Maybe not. I recently posted a video about the Health at Every Size movement. And in that video, I talk about how a certain number is neither inherently healthy or inherently unhealthy. It's more about the behaviors that land a person at a certain body weight. And I really encourage you to go watch that video as well. However, obesity is linked with over 200 comorbidities or co-conditions. So these are diseases that tend to develop in people who are in larger bodies and have this higher BMI. So I'm not going to go over the relationship or the data that we have on weight loss medications and all 200 of these comorbidities. First of all, we don't have that amount of research. And second of all, we would be here for the rest of the year. I am today going to focus specifically on type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and polycystic ovary syndrome, and how weight loss medications are showing improvements in the development, prevalence, and prognosis for patients with these three conditions. In 2020, about 38% of American adults had prediabetes or some level of insulin resistance. On top of that 38%, another 43% have diagnosed type 2 diabetes. By 2050, the projection is about 60% of the American adult population will have type 2 diabetes specifically. Now, insulin resistance is also seen in people at all BMI classifications, not just people in the overweight or obese BMIs. In 2024, a study was preliminarily presented at a conference that connected insulin resistance to 31 different diseases, including Parkinson's disease, gout, which is a type of arthritis, sciatica, as well as these more prevalent chronic conditions that we talk about most often. For females specifically, insulin resistance at any BMI was linked to higher risk of early death. And this study followed just under 430,000 adults for an average of 13 years. So that is a pretty high quality study, even though it is not a clinical trial. You may be thinking, why can't people just lose weight and reduce their risk of type 2 diabetes without medication, just by using food and lifestyle? The short answer is, if they could, they would have by now. Almost every patient on a weight loss medication has tried diet, exercise, and lifestyle interventions prior to getting on a weight loss medication, simply because these weight loss medications have not been available on the market for very long. And most people have tried dieting in some capacity at least once prior to being prescribed these medications. The other problem is that the amount of weight loss that is needed or recommended for folks to, say, reverse type 2 diabetes is higher than what we typically see in the average lifestyle intervention. So in a typical weight loss program, we see a sustained weight loss of about 5% of a person's original body weight. But the recommendation and what is often necessary to reverse type 2 diabetes is actually a 15%, sometimes larger, reduction in body weight from someone's starting weight. So even when a lifestyle intervention is successful, it is usually not successful to the degree that is actually needed to cure or reverse type 2 diabetes. Today's weight loss medications, however, like semaglutide and tirzepatide, they have been shown to, on average, create about 15 to 22% weight loss. There have been weight loss medications on the market for a couple of decades now. Those earlier weight loss medications, they also were not achieving this degree of weight loss. The only other therapy that has achieved this above 15% weight loss is bariatric surgery. So the fact that these weight loss medications are creating between 15 and 22% weight loss on average, that is in line with what we recommend to reverse type 2 diabetes. The research is really supporting that these medications are not just creating that 15 to 22% weight loss, but they are also addressing the type 2 diabetes. A 2022 meta-analysis being a paper that looks at several clinical trials altogether, found that semaglutide, like Ozempic, Rybelsus, Wegovy, and Tirzepatide, Mounjaro, and Zepbound, they were more effective than other weight loss medications at lowering HbA1c. HbA1c is our blood glucose metric that looks at average blood glucose over the last 2 to 3 months. And that is one of our primary or standard markers of type 2 diabetes. Semaglutide and tirzepatide were also shown in this meta-analysis to lower fasting glucose more so than these other weight loss medications or placebo. Fasting glucose is another one of our typical biomarkers for diagnosing type 2 diabetes. And so we are seeing the semaglutide is a better medication, a better therapy for high blood sugar than previous medications on the market and better than placebo, certainly. Now, these weight loss medications are also showing some promise in slowing or preventing the progression from pre-diabetes to full-blown type 2 diabetes. There was a study done using tirzepatide in patients with elevated blood sugar, so pre-diabetes. And after 3 years of using the medication, only 1.3% of the medication group had progressed from pre-diabetes levels to type 2 diabetes levels, whereas 13% of the placebo group had progressed from pre-diabetes to type 2. Now, they also then removed the medication from the medication group for 17 weeks. And after that period of no medication, only 2.4% of the group that had been on the tirzepatide progressed to type 2 diabetes, where in that 17 weeks, another 13% of the placebo group progressed to type 2 diabetes. So this is showing us, even in patients who are on a weight loss medication and then maybe achieve an appropriate weight and come off of the medication, they are less likely to develop type 2 diabetes. Now, that isn't necessarily saying that they are less likely to gain the weight back after they stop the medication. We'll talk about that more in another video. But in terms of chronic disease development, being able to remain at a normal glucose level as opposed to progressing to type 2 diabetes even after taking the medication, that is a good sign for chronic disease prevention specifically. So let's talk next about these weight loss medications and heart disease. In 2020, just a hair under 10% of Americans were diagnosed with cardiovascular disease. However, cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of death worldwide, and 51% of Americans have high blood pressure. And high blood pressure is often called the silent killer because many people don't know that they have high blood pressure. High blood pressure is a really high risk factor for developing other types of chronic diseases. And because we don't know we have it, it oftentimes goes untreated. Now, obesity, especially excess adipose tissue in that midsection around our major organs, is the primary risk factor for developing cardiovascular disease. In short, being overweight puts extra stress on your heart by raising your blood pressure, raising your cholesterol, and raising your blood sugar levels. Too much fat tissue can cause inflammation and clog your arteries. Both of these things just make it harder for blood to flow to the, other parts of your body and deliver oxygen to all those tissues. And without oxygen, we are at a higher risk of heart failure, heart attack, and strokes. Type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance are also major drivers for cardiovascular disease, because when we have sugar pooling in the bloodstream instead of entering the cells, it makes our circulatory system and our vascular system less flexible. We want our vascular system to be flexible and responsive to when, conditions change around us and our blood pressure goes up or down. If it's not flexible, then again, it makes it harder for the body to appropriately deliver blood and oxygen where it needs to go. I will talk a lot more about this when we get to the cardiovascular disease series on this channel. Now, just like type 2 diabetes, some improvements in health and risk can be made with smaller amounts of weight loss. However, we are still recommending for people with a risk of cardiovascular disease who have a BMI of 30 or higher that they lose around 15 to 20% of their original body weight. Again, lifestyle, diet, and exercise. If we're only achieving in that 3 to 7% body weight reduction, they may be improved, but the relative risk reduction at a 3% weight loss versus a 15% weight loss, it's just not that comparable. Diet, exercise, lifestyle alone is probably not enough to make a meaningful reduction in risk of cardiovascular disease for most of these people. A clinical trial called the SELECT trial included 17,000 adults, and it looked specifically at semaglutide usage in people who had obesity and they had an elevated risk for cardiovascular disease, but they did not have type 2 diabetes. And this study was specifically looking at, can we reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease? It wasn't really looking at weight, and it wasn't really looking at blood sugar necessarily, but it was looking at, can we improve cardiovascular health in this group of people? This study found that 52% of the semaglutide group improved their BMI, as opposed to just 15% in the placebo group. 12% of the people on semaglutide actually brought their BMI down to below 25. Which means not only were they no longer considered obese, they weren't even considered overweight. In the placebo group, only 1.2% achieved that reduction to a BMI under 25. The medication group also reduced their waist circumference, so looking at that adiposity in the midsection, by 7.7 centimeters. The placebo group reduced that midsection circumference by just 1.3 centimeters. Now, we know from other research that a 4 centimeter reduction in the circumference of the midsection, where that really dangerous adipose tissue lives, can provide massive benefits in the reduction of cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes risk. Now, again, the medication group far exceeded, almost doubled, that recommended 4 centimeter circumference reduction, whereas the placebo group did not really come close to what they needed to lose to reduce their risk of cardiovascular disease. Another study found that semaglutide improved the prognosis, or the course of disease, for folks with heart failure that was specific to obesity-related heart failure. Now, as a person with a family history of cardiovascular disease, this is huge news to me. And as a dietitian, it seems like this medication is a really worthwhile tool for our patients that have these obesity-related conditions. As I said, obesity and insulin resistance are linked to a whole slew of chronic diseases. So these medications could really improve the lives of a lot of patients with a lot of health challenges. But the last condition I'm going to talk about in this video specifically is PCOS, or polycystic ovary syndrome. Now, this condition is a hormone condition that seems to be related to insulin resistance that leads to irregular periods, acne, abnormal facial hair or body hair growth, as well as difficulty conceiving for people with ovaries. High insulin levels seem to trigger the ovaries to make more of our typically male hormones, which can lead to these symptoms like an irregular period and acne. A study published in 2023 with patients who had both PCOS and a BMI over 30 who did not lose weight in traditional lifestyle, diet, and exercise interventions found that semaglutide medication was useful for most of their cohort. Now, they did have a small number of participants as opposed to the other studies we've talked about in this video. They had just 27 patients, but the results are still promising. And I imagine we're going to see a lot more research in this area because, to be quite honest, we do not have a lot of good treatments or a lot of good therapies for people with PCOS. Now, they found that over 80% of their participants lost at least 5% of their original body weight. Now, remember, these folks did not lose 5% of their original body weight when changing diet and exercise. So already the semaglutide has been more effective at addressing BMI and excess weight and adipose tissue than lifestyle intervention. Even those who didn't lose that 5% or more of their original body weight did see improvements in insulin resistance with the semaglutide medication, and fasting blood glucose levels normalized in 80% of this cohort. In patients who lost more than 5% of their body weight in 3 months of starting the semaglutide medication, they continued taking this medication for another 3 months. At the end of the 6-month trial, the average weight loss in that group was 25 pounds, and the average BMI of the group dropped from 34.4 to 29.4. So they dropped from nearly class 2 obesity to under class 1 into the overweight BMI. And 80% of that group actually achieved regular or normal menstruation cycles. Again, we do not have a lot of therapies or a lot of treatments, medication or otherwise, that produce these kinds of results in people with PCOS. Sometimes regular weight loss and weight management programs work for these folks, but as we saw from, the original 27 in this semaglutide cohort, it doesn't always work to just change diet and exercise in people with PCOS. So again, really promising research into some of our chronic conditions and chronic diseases that we don't have a lot of good options for. Now, as a dietitian, you are never going to catch me promoting a quick fix or a pill that can replace a healthy diet. But obesity is a complex chronic disease, and we don't tell patients with other types of diseases not to take a medication that they would seemingly benefit. So I do think that these medications have a place in our toolbox for addressing obesity and chronic. We also can't forget the social determinants of health, the environments in which we all operate that got us as Americans into the health situation that we are in. So I also don't think that prescribing medications is the only step we should be taking to address the obesity epidemic. So last big reminder, these studies have also shown these weight loss medications are most effective when they are paired with a healthy diet and with exercise. So just because you are taking a weight loss medication doesn't mean you don't need to think or worry about what you are eating. In fact, research is starting to come out looking at the typical diet of people on these weight loss medications and finding that there are some holes, there are some deficiencies in what these patients are eating. I'm going to talk about maximizing and maintaining your results if you are taking a weight loss medication. So tip number 1 is stay on the medication and use the most effective dose for you. Now, these weight loss medications are not meant to be short-term diet plans if you just want to lose a couple pounds for a vacation or a life milestone. They are meant to be taken for years to treat obesity and other chronic conditions. Now, study after study shows that when people stop taking their weight loss medications, they are likely to regain some or all of the weight that they initially lost. I also saw someone on social media ask an influencer if they should start microdosing semaglutide, and that influencer correctly said that there really is no research or evidence that supports taking a microdose or a small dose of these semaglutide medications in pursuit of any weight loss or health goals. Now, the recommendation from the drug makers and from doctors is to start on a low dose of these medications, but to move up to the therapeutic dose, the dose that was tested in clinical trials, because those are the doses that are going to actually produce results. So that leads me to my second tip, which is to manage the barriers that might cause you to come off of your medication early. The Cleveland Clinic looked at the results from 8,000 free living weight loss medication users. Free living just means they are regular people living in the everyday world, just like you or me, as opposed to the clinical trial results, which are just much more controlled. Now, this study found that these folks, the regular people who took their weight loss medications for 12 months, lost on average 11.9% of their original body weight. And that is a bit lower than the 15 to 20% that was seen in the clinical trials. However, they also found that folks who took their medication for 3 months or less lost only 3.6% of their original body weight, and folks who took their medication more than 3 months but less than 12 lost 6.8% of their original body weight. So that 3 to 7% is actually the exact range that we see in our existing weight loss programs. Things that are only changing lifestyle, what we eat and how we exercise. So what this tells us is that if you are going to be on this medication for less than a year, it is probably going to be a whole lot more expensive and just as effective to change your lifestyle rather than take these medications. Now, the leading reasons that people came off of their weight loss medications early were side effects or symptoms, cost of the drug, and supply disruptions. The side effects most commonly cited by weight loss medication users are nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, constipation, and stomach pain. Now, there are 2 things that you can really do to manage those side effects. 1, you can eat the right foods. Oftentimes, it is not eating or eating the wrong foods that is causing nausea in these patients. And if you want to know what those right foods are, go watch my 7 foods video, because that will give you a whole bunch more information. Now, the other thing that you can do to manage your nausea is to start at a low dose and move up to that therapeutic dose at an appropriate cadence. Again, if you think you have to jump right into the highest dose because you're only planning on being on the medication for a few months, or you can only afford the medication for a few months, then you are probably going to feel terrible and then go right back to where you were at the start. Now, your doctor can also prescribe you an anti-nausea medication while you are taking these weight loss medications. However, I have seen disruptions in Zofran, which is the most common anti-nausea medication, because so many folks are now trying these weight loss medications and just experiencing more nausea. Now, when it comes to supply and cost of things like Ozempic and Wegovy, things are getting interesting at this moment in time. So once these prescriptions really started to take off, the demand outpaced the supply of the FDA-approved drug. So compounding and online pharmacies started to make dupes. However, in June of 2025, when I am recording this, Novo Nordisk, which is the pharmaceutical company that produces Ozempic and Wegovy, sued to get those dupes off the market. So these online pharmacies like Hims and Hers, they are no longer able to produce those lower cost drugs. Now, this means that access to these lower price drugs is essentially going to come to an end. Now, without insurance coverage, these medications are over $1,000 a month. They run between $10,000 and $16,000 for a year supply. And each brand of these weight loss medications is only approved for certain conditions. So just because you qualify for one medication or another does not necessarily mean that that is the medication that your insurance company is going to cover. So if you get on one of these medications, so if you qualify for one of these medications, there is no guarantee that you are going to be able to afford it. And that could mean that not paying for these medications for just a few months is going to be better for your wallet. And maybe, therefore, you can invest in some other things that are going to help you be more successful in a lifestyle weight loss intervention. That money can maybe go towards paying a personal trainer, paying a registered dietitian to give you some accountability on these lifestyle programs. And both of those things, hiring a coach in some capacity, has been shown to be more effective on the lifestyle side and the medication side. So if you are actually needing to lose that 15 to 20% of your body weight to manage a chronic condition, you might actually qualify for something like gastric bypass surgery. And it might be worth having a conversation with your doctor and your insurance company about what they will cover and what is most appropriate for you. All right, so tip number 3 is to build muscle. I recommend that everyone build muscle to reduce their risk of chronic disease. But for folks who are taking weight loss medications, it is incredibly important to be working on resistance and strength training while they are losing weight. Otherwise, we are in danger of losing the skeletal muscle mass and the heart muscle mass that can actually help us stay healthy after we come off these medications if we do need to. One thing we know from existing science is that people with more muscle mass burn more calories at any age and at any weight than their peers who are the same age, the same weight, but that weight is made up of less muscle mass. So if our goal is not to regain weight once we come off of the medication, we are going to want to have more muscle mass and therefore have a bigger calorie budget that we can eat without seeing weight gain. When you come off of the medication, your higher appetite levels and maybe that food noise, your thoughts about food, that's going to come back to some extent. And so if you have a bigger calorie budget that can keep you in a calorie balance, and that is just going to be more effective. And the best way that we know to do that is to have more muscle mass. You need to be engaging in progressive strength training exercise. So strength training exercise is any type of exercise that causes your muscles to work against force or weight. We typically think of weightlifting. Now, progressive strength training or progressive overload refers to the idea that over time, so maybe week over week or month over month, you actually need to be adding more weight, more intensity, more time under tension to this strength training exercise. So if you are not currently doing a lot of resistance training, you may be able to start with body weight exercises and start to develop more muscle and more strength. But over time, you are going to get used to your body weight, and also your body weight is going to be going down. So in order to maintain a progressive strength training plan, over time, you will probably have to progress to using some sort of weight or resistance. That could be barbells, dumbbells, kettlebells, sandbags, weight vests. It could be the machines at the gym, to some extent, maybe water, swimming or water walking, right? There's going to be some resistance there, more so than walking through air. These are all great options. And you may need to play around with a few different styles of resistance exercise to find the one that you enjoy enough to do it regularly. Maybe it's just finding the one that you hate the least, but but it is incredibly important for both muscle and bone health to be engaging in resistance exercise training. Now, last reminder here, if you consistently carry around a purse, a backpack, a briefcase, a baby, that is weight that you are typically carrying around. And so to achieve progressive overload above your normal amount of resistance training that you're doing, your weights are going to need to be heavier than that purse, that backpack, that baby. Now, tip number 4 is to change your dietary pattern. One thing we know is that people who eat a lot of fruits and vegetables, a good amount of protein, 25 to 35 grams of fiber per day, and most of their fat is coming from plant and fish sources, they tend to eat fewer calories but feel satiated than people who are eating diets that are lower in fruits and vegetables, lower in whole grains and fiber. The fats that they're eating are mostly coming from like red meats or processed foods. So that is a good place to start. If your diet doesn't already look like that or didn't look like that before you started taking one of these medications, you are going to want to shift what you are eating towards, that more fruit and vegetables, lean meats, and healthy plant-based fats for the most part, because that is going to help with the feeling full and getting fewer calories. That is going to help you maintain energy balance or even an energy deficit, even coming off of the weight loss medication. We also know that one of the mechanisms of Ozempic, Wegovy, Tirzepatide, Semaglutide medications is to slow down digestion. Now, there are some ways that we can slow down our digestion even without these weight loss medications. It's not quite to the same degree, but it can be useful to maintain the weight loss that we had on these medications. So fiber or whole grains, protein, and fats, they empty from the stomach slower than things like refined grains, than candy, sugar, liquids, soda, things like that. So that is another reason to shift our dietary pattern to eating more whole grains, to eating more fruits and vegetables, because those things have fiber that will slow down your carbohydrate digestion. We want to prioritize protein because, again, it digests a little bit more slowly, and we want to make sure that we're getting enough fat in our diet because it slows everything down, similar to how semaglutide or Ozempic medications are going to slow things down. I also recommend eating more balanced meals and snacks. So pairing your carbohydrates, which tend to digest more quickly, with a protein or with a fat, so we can achieve that slowdown to mimic what is happening with the weight loss medication. Of course, you are still going to achieve weight loss if you continue to eat the same foods that you were eating before, but in smaller portion sizes. But when you come off of that weight loss medication, you won't have changed what is your normal or what are your go-to foods. And that food noise and your appetite is going to come back when you come off of the medication. And if you are still used to eating, refined carbohydrates, not a lot of fruits and vegetables, your appetite and your intake is going to look like it did before you started taking the medication. And that is going to contribute to the weight coming back. Also, if you are not being thoughtful about the fruits, the vegetables, the lean proteins while you're taking these medications, you may end up being one of those folks who develops some sort of deficiency because you're not getting enough of the vitamins and minerals that you need while you're not eating very much. And that can be just as detrimental, if not more, for your health than being overweight. Now, if you need ideas or you need suggestions, including what to eat at some fast food restaurants, some no-cook ideas, even some dessert ideas, I have all of those in my free weight loss medication ebook, which I will link down in the description of this video. I also have a free fiber ebook that might be useful as you are coming off of these medications to ensure that you are getting enough of those slower carbohydrates in your diet as opposed to, those refined carbs. My last tip is to address those non-food and non-exercise specific conditions that led to your weight gain in the first place. I do not at all mean this as a way to shame you. Life is hard and very expensive. Western civilization and capitalism and the American healthcare system is not conducive to good health. There are a lot of barriers built into our society that are keeping you from being healthy. Can we figure out what your barriers are specifically and address them while you are taking the weight loss medications so that when you come off the medications, you don't have the same challenges as you did before? Now, if you are one of the millions of people who struggle with knowing what is healthy, what should I be eating, how should I be exercising, if knowledge is your barrier, then I would really love if you would subscribe to this channel, because the whole goal of this project is to provide easy to implement, easy to understand, evidence-based nutrition education without the time commitment or the cost of seeing a dietitian in their office. If one of your barriers is limited access to healthy foods, I encourage you to find the resources in your community that can help provide support for paying for groceries. That could be your local food pantry. It could be a local discount grocery store or a food recovery shop. It could be a mutual aid organization in your area, SNAP or WIC, which is formerly known as food stamps. That's what SNAP is called now. And then WIC is the Nutrition Assistance Program for women, infants, and children. Those are all good ways to cut the cost of groceries for you, and I highly recommend you use them if you qualify for them. I also highly recommend the creators Dollar Tree Dinners and Julia Pacheco here on YouTube. They have a ton of videos on how to eat well on a very small budget. Even if you just need some visuals on how to cook, those two creators have a ton of videos that are going to be useful to you. If one of your barriers is that you are super busy, you have lots of kids' activities, or you work multiple jobs, or you're in school and you have lots of homework, if you just don't have time to cook for yourself, I recommend trying out a meal delivery service. I have talked about before, but in my house, when we are super busy, we use either Factor or Cook Unity to get our dinners. Not a sponsored video, but I do have a discount code for each of those platforms down in the description. Now, if food is part of your emotional regulation toolkit, if you feel like you are oftentimes stress eating, anxiety eating, emotional eating, then I really encourage you to connect with a therapist, work through any trauma you've experienced, and develop some other coping mechanisms. So you don't just fall back into old patterns if you do get off of these weight loss medications. So to wrap this one up, my 5 tips for maximizing and maintaining the weight loss that you experience while taking something like Ozempic or Mounjaro are to, 1, understand going in that this is a long-term commitment to medication and plan to be on Ozempic, Mounjaro for at least 2 years. My second tip is to manage the costs and manage the symptoms or side effects of taking these medications, because those are the 2 main things that are going to help you achieve number 1, staying on the medication for the necessary amount of time. Number 3, build muscle mass. Get stronger. It is going to reduce your risk of developing chronic diseases over time. It is also just going to increase your calorie expenditure budget on a daily basis, which means you will be able to eat more without gaining weight. And that is hugely important when you are trying to maintain weight loss through any means. My next tip is to change your normal diet. I didn't talk about it a lot in this video, but this is something that I went through when I was in my late 20s and early 30s. I did not eat a green vegetable until I was like 24 years old. I ate 2 bags of candy almost every night when I came home from CrossFit. It took time, but I have now changed my dietary pattern. I eat vegetables regularly. I eat more blueberries than candy. So it can be done, and I recommend that you use the time on the weight loss medication to actually do that shift in your regular dietary pattern rather than just eating smaller versions of the same foods that you always eat. And my last tip to maintain and maximize your weight loss medication experience is to take some time and address those other factors that originally led you to weight gain. Thank you so much for watching this GLP-1 masterclass. I hope that after this time we've spent together, you feel a little bit more informed, a little bit more empowered, and you have some good ideas and some good tools of what to do next. If you found this masterclass helpful, you haven't had enough of me yet, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I publish new evidence-based nutrition videos every single week. You also heard in this masterclass about the connection between GLP-1 medications and some other chronic diseases like PCOS and heart disease. I have more videos specifically on those topics that I will link on the end card here. I also created 3 free ebooks that I will link to down in the description of this video. The first ebook is specifically about GLP-1 medications. There's a lot of information in that book that you've heard in these videos. There are also some balanced recipes that will help you address those nutrient deficiencies that are common in folks who are taking GLP-1 medications. I have a fiber ebook that has practical tips and food swaps to boost your fiber intake, which is really useful for folks on GLP-1 medications and folks who are not necessarily on GLP-1 medications. You can combine any 3 meals in that ebook to hit the recommended fiber intake. My third ebook is all about how to eat more veggies. I was not a big vegetable eater until I was in my mid-20s, and so I put some of my favorite high vegetable recipes in there because vegetables are so useful in everyone's diet, packed with vitamins, packed with minerals, and they're very low in calories. And if you still have more questions after watching this masterclass, please leave them in the comments of this video and I will answer them as soon as I see them. I am here as a resource without the expense or the time commitment of making an appointment and seeing a registered dietitian in person. Thank you so much for being here. Bye.